Now, Nina Turner, former Democratic Ohio State Senator who rose to national prominence as an outspoken backer of Bernie Sanders during last year's presidential primaries. She's gone on to denounce Donald Trump and the Democratic National Committee. She's also president of Our Revolution, described as the next step for Bernie Sanders' movement. I spoke to her earlier about that movement and the aftermath of the deadly violence in Charlottesville. Here's that interview. Watch. You've said, Nina, that the system is trying to drive a wedge between progressive people of color and progressive whites. What kind of wedge? Wouldn't they be aligned?
Well, we should be, but, you know, there's a lot of talk about identity politics within the Democratic Party itself. And in that frame, it does drive a wedge between progressive whites and progressives, or I should say establishment, those in the Democratic establishment are trying to use identity politics to drive a wedge. But I do believe that the majority, the conscious majority of people of color and whites make up the overwhelming majority of the electorate, and it's how do you bring those two synergies together with understanding and with respect for one another, pushing towards a progressive agenda for this country.
What is Our Revolution?
Our Revolution was born from Senator Bernie Sanders' campaign. As you know, Larry, and many of your viewers, when the senator traveled in 2016, he talked about galvanizing millions and millions of people all across this country, and he asked people to get involved, that if we could get a revolution in this country, we could change this country, similar to what FDR was able to do, you know, after the Great Recession in this country, or Depression, I should say, in this country. And also in 1944, when President FDR talked about an economic Bill of Rights, what Americans should expect from their government. And so Senator Bernie Sanders very much ran in that same spirit, but his message was, it's not about me, it is about us. So even though he did not get the nomination, he continued to push forward. His idea, his brainchild was Our Revolution, and so we are the embodiment of his work moving forward. We have a saying at Our Revolution that campaigns end, but the revolutions endure. So we empower grassroots organizations all over this country. Larry, we have about 400 organizations right now all across the country in 49 states, and 7 of those are international. So we have 2 in Canada, we have 1 in Great Britain. So we do have an international footprint right now, but it is really about the empowerment of the grassroots so that they know that the power is really theirs and that they have the power to elect local, state, and federal leaders that will then hold up the progressive mantle through public policy.
Can we say, Nina, that you could have been more practical if the Bernie Sanders people turned out? You wouldn't have Donald Trump.
No, Larry, we can't. Listen.
Well, be practical. If you stayed home on a principle that you didn't like Hillary and you didn't like Trump, you elected Trump.
You know, I disagree with that, Larry. This election, outcome of this election should not be at the feet of Bernie Sanders supporters. I mean, let's face it, about 29% of eligible voters did not come out in 2016, and that cuts across the spectrum. There were focus groups done of people who voted for President Obama in 2012 and also voted for Mr. Trump in 2016, and there was a disconnect during that election cycle. But I don't think that we lay that at the feet of the voters. It is the job of people who run for office to both motivate and excite the imagination of the voters in this country. And Democrats, unfortunately, have been losing elections for the last 8 years, maybe 9 now, about 1,100 seats across state elections and also in the Congress. And so the election of Mr. Trump was really the straw that broke the camel's back, Larry. So we have so much work to do in this country, and I'm hoping that Democrats will wake up and go back to our FDR roots, go back to our Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm roots, and really inspire and engage the citizens of this country, not just during election time, but 365 days of the year, so that they will feel motivated and know that there is a real difference when they come out to vote.
Mr. Trump told me many years ago that he supported a single-payer health care system. You told Politico you think there's something wrong with Democrats who don't support the single-payer health insurance idea, which is basically Medicare for all. You think that should be a litmus test? The nominee in 2020 should be for a single-payer system?
It's a value proposition, Larry. It's not my litmus test. It's the test of the American people. The overwhelming majority of the American people, regardless of their political ideology, really believe that the government should take more of a role in managing and providing health care. Medicare works. Ask our seniors, ask our elders. It really does work. And in the wealthiest country on the face of the earth, it really is a moral question for us, whether you're Democrat or Republican. But because the Democratic Party is the party of FDR, we are the ones that espouse these high-minded values. Why wouldn't we be the party that wants to push Medicare for all through? You know, again, going back to FDR in 1944, that economic Bill of Rights, within that Bill of Rights, he had health care there. He had jobs there. He had people living in decent homes and also safety nets for folks, too. We have to get back to that to show very clearly that there is a profound difference between us and the Republican Party, not just by what we say, but what we're willing to stand up for and what we are willing to do.
What was your reaction to Charlottesville?
Oh my God, heavy, just heavy heart. I'm restless. You know, the people that I talk to are very heavy. You know, I teach these kinds of things. I'm a professor at Cuyahoga Community College, and I teach about this kind of stuff, the KKK, the emergence of it, you know, after slavery ended, you know, during the Reconstruction period. But never did I think in the 21st century that we would see in such a overt way the display of hate and bigotry that happened in Virginia, the loss of life. You know, my thoughts and prayers, as are all of ours, with Heather's family, the 19 people who were injured, and also the 2 law enforcement officers that lost their lives on the way there. We cannot, absolutely not tolerate that kind of open racism and bigotry in our country, Larry. We have a long way to go, and it is in the DNA of the country. And part of the reason why this is so shocking is because we have not been a perfect nation, but one thing we can say, we have been a nation of progress, but we are being reminded that we are long overdue to really deal with the vestiges of racism and discrimination, systemic racism and discrimination too, I want to add, Larry, because it's easy to look at what happened in Charlottesville, and as we should have righteous indignation and stand unified as a country. But going deeper than that, we need to deal with systemic racism and bigotry in this country, and we haven't done it. I think it's time for truth and reconciliation in the United States of America.
Do you think the president's initial statement was disappointing?
Very much so. I mean, he had the opportunity in that moment to unify this country morally, and he failed to do it.
Did his second statement help?
It was better. I mean, he said you know, he named the organizations KKK, neo-Nazis, racism, bigotry. He said it was evil, it was hateful. But now just today, he turns around and kind of reverses course. So President Trump is missing the opportunity to take the moral lead in this country, to really do something profound, to say something profound, and then to show through the Department of Justice that he understands. He talks a lot about the ills that, you know, the terrorists that plague us outside of this country, but he has forgotten that he has taken an oath in this country to protect us from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And make no mistake, the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, they are domestic terrorists, and he has an obligation. Even if he doesn't see a moral obligation, he certainly has a legal obligation to protect this nation from that kind, and the people of this nation from that kind of bigotry.
Do you think he's a racist?
Well, you know, that's asking me to look into his heart. I will say that what he has shown this country so far, not just as president of the United States, but some of the things that he has done in the past, has shown him not to be sensitive to issues of race and class. But whether or not he is a racist is for him to answer that question.
You declined an invitation to run for vice president on the Green Party ticket. Would you run for office? Would you like to run for office again?
Well, Larry, you know, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess once a political person in that way, always one. You know, my heart is certainly with the people, but I am excited right now at this moment. I will never rule that out, that I will not say that I will never run again, but to be the president of our revolution right now is a high honor, because I get to use this wonderful organization that was birthed from the vision of Senator Bernie Sanders to travel this country and galvanize people for them to believe what President Nelson Mandela once said, which is, it always seems impossible until it is done. And I want the vast majority of Americans to know that what connects us is stronger, and that we can really create a nation that is for all people, where people really do strive. It is within us. We just have to put in the sweat equity to do it.
It's ourrevolution.com. Thank you, Nina.
Thank you, Mr. Larry King.